Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, tonight we're going to be starting a new series of shirim. And this series of shirim is going to be titled Nighttime of the World, shirim on the first Mishna in Maseches Brachos. Now what we're going to try and do tonight is we're going to try and give a little bit of context behind the mission, or what we're going to try and do in terms of focusing on the origin of Torah Sheba'al Peh, of trying to understand and gain some insight into what Chazal offered us when they opened up Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, when they opened up the world of Torah Sheba'al Peh, with the first Mishnah in Brachos in particular. Part of the humble attempt over here is to show something that the Tzaddik and the Gaon Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern Shlita has been talking about for a very long time. And that is that very often a person begins to assume that there's a dichotomy, there's a split between the worlds of Torah. That a person starts off with Niglos HaTorah, a person begins in the revealed elements of Torah, studying Torah's Moshe, the Chamishi Chumshei Torah, Nach, coming to understand Halacha, Mishna, Gemara, Poskim. And theoretically, or at least as the authoritative commentators have expressed throughout history, only once a person has completed their mission or accomplished their role in the realm of the revealed aspects of Torah, the exoteric expression of the way that a Jewish person is supposed to function in this world, only then are they able to graduate and go into the deep end of Nistaros HaTorah, of the hidden realms of Torah, of the esoteric of Torah, of Panemius HaTorah. And very often, and you find this very explicitly in the writings of the Arizal and his Talmidim, Rav Chaim Vital in particular in his introduction to the Eitz Chaim Kadisha, that in relationship to Panemius HaTorah, in relationship to the deeper ideas hidden within the Torah, the revealed Torah is considered to be something secondary. That halacha and Gemara, all of those elements of the revealed teachings of the Torah, the Mishnah, are seen as a stepping stone for a person to come and arrive at the world of Nistaros HaTorah. To the extent that one who focuses too strongly and exclusively on Niglos HaTorah is referred to as someone who is eating from the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, somebody who is eating from that unfortunate symptom of human frailty and human failure, that Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, that place of distortion and confusion, that one who learns only Niglos HaTorah is said to live within the realm, the space of the information of the revealed Torah, which is the world of the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, versus someone who lives in the world of Nistaros HaTorah, someone who delves deeply into the teachings of Kabbalah, into the teachings of Pnimius HaTorah, is said to be someone who lives eating from the Eitz HaChaim. And we find such a distinction between the revealed aspects of Torah and the concealed aspects of Torah, that if one is not careful, they can come to assume that the ultimate goal of Niglos HaTorah, that the ultimate goal of learning the exoteric expressions of the Torah Sanigla, of Mishnah, Gemara, Halacha, is simply secondary to the ultimate goal of coming to the apex of starting to study the inner teachings of Torah. But what our tzaddikim have shown us over and over, especially the tzaddik Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern Shlita, is that in truth, there's a three-step process. It's not simply a two-step process. Everything holy is comprised of three stages, not simply two. From the perspective of two stages, so yes, a person learns Niglos HaTorah, learns the revealed aspects of Torah for the sake of moving upwards towards the concealed aspects of Torah, that Torah that speaks to the neshama and not just to the guf. But it doesn't end there, because the entire purpose, the entire value, the essential goal, when a person properly studies Pnimius HaTorah, when a person properly understands the inner teachings of Torah, is to then return back to Niglos HaTorah, to go back, to make a detour back to the original space of Torah that one began with, Niglos HaTorah, what was apparently cold and detail-oriented and specific on its revealed behavioral tendencies of halacha to tell us how to function, And our job at that point is to force the lights of Pnimius HaTorah into the vessels of Niglos HaTorah. The goal ultimately is to reveal the hidden Torah within the revealed Torah. And for a person to begin to look at Niglos HaTorah in such a way that they come to understand that Be'emes, in truth, it's of a deeper level than Pnimius HaTorah. When I learn the externalities of Torah, Torah Sanigla, without any understanding of the inner essence of what those ideas are coming to teach, that is an introduction that leads me towards Pnimius HaTorah. And then I come to learn Pnimius HaTorah, I come to understand the neshama of all things. But one who simply stops at understanding the neshama has lost out on the true essence of the purpose of Talmud Torah, which is then to draw the neshama back into the guf, to draw Nishma Satorah, Pnimia Satorah back into the Kalim of Niglo Satorah, so that the Halacha and the Gemara and the Mishnah and the Torah Shebechsav are now no longer in contradiction, God forbid, to Pnimia Satorah, but rather they become vessels that allow us to reveal the true potency of Pnimia Satorah in a newfound, hitherto unrevealed way. Because now what I have done is I have taken the neshama, I have taken that space of openness and expansivity and creativity and all of the elements that come along with the study of the hidden aspects of Torah, the neshama of Torah, how the Torah speaks to my soul, not only to my body. I take that residual space of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's concealed Torah, and I drag it back in to the vessels of the revealed Torah, so that now when I study Shas, when I study Mishnah, when I study whatever it is that I'm studying, I see no distinction between the connectivity that I have to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to my neshama when I'm learning Niglos HaTorah or when I'm learning Nistaros HaTorah. That when a person properly understands Pnimius HaTorah, they'll also come to understand that there is nothing deeper, nothing more concealed, nothing more unifying and emuna drawing than studying the revealed concepts of Torah, of studying a halacha, of learning how a person has to live their lives in this world. There were certain tzaddikim who spent their entire lives trying to engage in this unification. The unification of the revealed aspects of Torah and the concealed aspects of Torah. Not simply to show that there's unity between the two of them and that they're twin Torahs, but rather to say that the essence of the externalities of Torah is ultimately when we draw that light back down into the concealment of the revealed aspects of Torah that seem to be, at first glance, devoid of spirituality. The tzaddikim like Rabbi Nosson of Nimerov, who spent the end of his life writing the tremendous, masterful, miraculous work of Likutei Halachos, trying to draw the teachings of his master, Rabbi Nachman Tzlusi Yogan Aleinu, into the Shulchan Aruch itself, so that every siman in the Shulchan Aruch now becomes a gateway to understanding the depths of Rabbi Nachman's Torah. We saw this with the Arizal and Rav Chaim Vital in terms of Tamei HaMitzvos. You see this in later generations, and this is a model that the Tzaddik Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern follows very strongly. We see this when it comes to the Rogachover Gon, who through svara of Panemius, utilizing the svara of Moreh Nevuchim and that concealed element of Torah, and applying it to the svara of Lumdus and how to learn halacha properly, we saw this profound unification of the secret of abstraction, of this open-endedness that's associated with the hidden aspects of Torah, being drawn down into the revealed vessels of Chitzonius HaTorah. You saw this by tzaddikim like Rav Yosef Engel, who on every daf of their writings, you see a unity between the twin Torahs. You see how the revealed Torah and the concealed Torah are ultimately expressive of one another. Now, what the Rebbe points out in his Akdamat, his Biur on Shas, is that this relationship between these two elements of Torah is identical to the relationship of what we're trying to do when it comes to grasping HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world. That when it comes to learning Niglos HaTorah alone, if all a person is doing is studying Mishnah, Halacha, Torah Shebal Peh, devoid of an awareness of the neshama that pulsates at the depth of those words, unaware of the fact that halacha is the Rosh Tevos of Hariu LaHashem Kol Haaretz, that every halacha that a person learns and tries to live with is in fact the deepest unification that the Jewish neshama is capable of, then Niglos HaTorah appear to be worlds of separation. They appear to be worlds that are associated with distortion, where the clarity of the neshama, the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is not apparent. That world of kosher and usser, of tameh and tahor, of puzzle and mutter. It seems to be a world of darkness and concealment. And then a person goes to the world of the Zohar HaKadosh and the Arizal and the Rashash and the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon and the Ramchal and all of the tzaddikim. And a person feels like they're tasting Shemayim. A person feels like they've freed themselves from the confines of that detail orientation of Niglos HaTorah. And so we have this stark contrast between the separation of the revealed aspects of Torah, corresponding to worlds of separation, worlds of distortion, and we have the world of Pnimius HaTorah, of Nistaros HaTorah, which represents the world of unity. But then the level above that, as we've known all along, the level of Keser, is when a person has the capacity of drawing down the unity of Nistaros HaTorah, drawing down that light of the neshama, that awakenness, that wakefulness in the heart of the neshama that is spoken and aroused within the individual through the secrets of Torah, and you drag it back down into the revealed aspects of Torah, thereby revealing that the secrets of unity, the secrets of that unbridled light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as indicated by Pnimius HaTorah, doesn't simply exist in the realm beyond details, doesn't simply exist in that realm that is completely removed from details and distortion, but rather it expresses itself in a newfound and more intense way, specifically within concealment. That when I draw the light of Pnimius HaTorah into the guf of Niglos HaTorah, without negating Niglos HaTorah, but rather animating Niglos HaTorah, what I reveal is the light of the highest form of Torah, which is where the Nigla and the Nister are mityached together, where the concealed and the revealed are one and the same. And I now begin to understand the true secret of Hariu Hashem Kol Haaretz, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could be found down here in the most arcane details of human experience, as well as up there in the most expansive states of the neshama. That for a person who has truly understood the secret of Torah Lishma, of that yichud, that connectivity between the revealed aspect of Torah and the concealed aspect of Torah, is a person who has come to understand the secret of something and nothingness operating in unison, which is the light of Keser, which is the light of that infinite unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that reveals that even darkness is light. Phrased differently, Niglos HaTorah, revealed aspects of Torah, are associated with the sense of I-ness, of subjectivity. There is a subjective experience of engaging with halacha, of understanding svara hayeshera, of penetrating the text deeply with a sense of egoism. And then there's the world of ayin, of nothingness, where I leave behind the details and I ascend into the spectacular place of unifications and Maisa Merkava, where I lose the sense of self. And until we reach that third level, those two levels appear to be separate and in contrast to one another. But with the true awareness of Pnimius HaTorah, whose ultimate purpose is to be drawn back down into Niglos HaTorah, into the revealed aspects of Torah, thereby animating the body of the revealed Torah to show that inherent within the details is that which exceeds all imaginable details, that stuck within the measurements themselves is the immeasurable light that animates the measure. At that point, the person comes to understand the true unity of the Torah and the true unity of experience, where I am no longer simply operating on a level of ani, of ego, no longer simply operating on a level of ayin, of nothingness and nullification of ego, but rather, as the tzaddikim tell us, and Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern points out so often, this is the darga of ani ve'ayin bevas achas. It is the sense of subjectivity and nothingness at once. It is an engagement with the details, with the specificities of what it means to be a person who studies the minutiae of the law, who interrogates every aspect of a text for the sake of clarified reasoning, in spite of the fact that the subject matter is not speaking of spiritual matters. And specifically within those broken down texts, specifically within those emotionless, weightless texts of Niglos HaTorah, a person comes to uncover the depths of spirituality thereby revealing the interplay between light and darkness, between concealment and revelation, between somethingness and nothingness, revealing that light of Keser. And this Torah, this is the Torah of Atika Stima. This is the Torah that the tzaddikim spoke about, of the Torah of the future, where the distinctions that we typically assume to be true begin to fall away. And a person comes to understand that even when my mind is contemplating and struggling over an exoteric text, an idea that seems to be devoid of any enthusiasm or inspiration, offers me the opportunity to connect to God, to connect to myself, to connect to light in a way that is as powerful if I were learning the most esoteric and out there ideas. To try and show this throughout Shas is what the Rebbe is trying to do. It's what the Lubavitcher Rebbe Zchusei Ganalenu spent a lot of time doing. In the light of the Rogatchover as well, it's what Rabbi Nosson tried to do. It's what the Ramami Panau tried to do. Not tried, but they all succeeded in this. What the Rebbe has done, what Rav Itchemeyer Morgenstern does, is he shows it throughout Shulchan Aruch, he shows it throughout Shas, which is, in my humble opinion, an unparalleled project. But what we're going to try and do in this series of Shirim is we're going to look at the first Mishnah in Shas, and we're going to try and uncover 10 themes that are inherent within the Mishnah. And it's not to claim that these are explicit within the Mishnah. Like we've said and announced so many times, each person has their own Nakuda in Torah. Each person sees themselves in the Torah and the Torah in themselves. And therefore, each person finds what they will find through the eyes of their intellect. And so to delve deeply into a Mishnah, to delve deeply into the beginning text of Torah Sheba'al Peh for the sake of uncovering the hidden light of invisible unity within the visible distortion, is going to be what we try and do in this series of Shirim. And Be'emes, as our tzaddikim have told us, this could be done for every Mishnah and Shas. This could be done for every Daf Gemara. This could be done for every Halacha. But there's something specific about the first Mishnah in the sense that, as we know from the Vilna Gaon in his introduction to his Perush on the Tzafar Ditzniusa, as well as his Perush on Mishlei, that the introduction to something contains the kernel of everything that will eventually emerge from that introduction. And so if Shas begins with the first Mishnah in Maseches Brachos, so then there's something inherent within that Mishnah in Brachos of Me'emasai Korin Shema Ba'arvis that gives us access to the germ cell, or that quintessential point of what Torah Sheba'al Peh is coming to teach us. Now, in general, to properly descend into the particularities of what it means for Torah Sheba'al Peh to emerge out of Torah Shebechsav, and all of the different iterations of Torah Sheba'al Peh, would be a completely separate series of Shirim. For our purposes, what we're going to do is we're going to lump together Mishnah and Gemara to represent the full totality of Torah Sheba'al Peh. But in truth, if we were to truly delve into the particulars of Torah Sheba'al Peh, Mishnah and Gemara would be two separate worlds. But for our sake, we're going to lump together Mishnah, Talmud, all of it under the guise of Torah Sheba'al Peh. But suffice it to say that Torah Sheba'al Peh represents a secondary mode of awareness, a secondary mode of experience for a human being in this world. Torah Shebechsav, the written Torah, in its clarity, Pnimius HaTorah, the Zohar HaKadosh, represents a clarified form of information that comes down to an individual, devoid of doubts, devoid of concealment, devoid of difficulty. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said this, Moshe conveyed it to us, and that's what it is. It's without doubt, it's without questioning. We accept it or we don't accept it. It is a light of certainty that emerges directly from the face, so to speak, where there is no confusion. It is compared to the daytime, as Chazal tell us that when Moshe Rabbeinu was in Shemayim receiving the Torah, he received both Torah Shebechsav, the written Torah, as well as the oral Torah, as well as Torah Sheba'al Peh. And the way that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to discern whether it was daytime or nighttime was the type of Torah Hashem was teaching him. That Torah Shebechsav, the written Torah, was taught during the day because it's as clarified as the day. It's as clear as the sun. There's no confusion. There's no doubts. But when Torah Sheba'al Peh was being taught, it was the nighttime because Torah Sheba'al Peh is nidmet layla. It's compared to night. Because Torah Shebechsav offers something clear. It offers first postulates. It offers clear ideas that I can receive from above down below. Torah Shebal Peh is what happens when we lose sight of the original language. Ideally, if it were not for the Chet HaEgel, if it were not for the Chet of Adam HaRishon, there would have been no need on a certain level for Torah Shebal Peh. Everything that we could possibly ever need to know for ourselves, for the world, for existence, for experience, would have been contained within Chamishe Chumshei Torah, as well as Sefer Yehoshua. But as a result of the human frailty and the human condition being revealed fully in its totality, we're forced into the difficult terrain of Torah Shebal Peh, where things are no longer clear, where we no longer hold on to that original voice from Har Sinai, that revelatory voice. Now Torah Shebal Peh is born in an echo. It's born at the end of Revelation. It emerges specifically when clarity dies, when Chazal want to describe themselves, when they want to describe what the Talmud Bavli is, when they want to describe the sum total of Shas, the pasuk, the source text that they choose to use to describe the essential character of Shas is B'machshechem hoshivani kamasei olam, that you have restored my soul like the dead of the world in darkness. Zu Talmud Bavli, this is the Talmud of Bavel. That Gemara learning, Mishna learning, the clarifications that emerge from the confusion and the thicket associated with the many intertwined branches of the 6 orders of Mishna is compared to darkness. Our tzaddikim tell us, the Vilna Gaon tells us, the Ramak tells us that Mishna is from the language of Shena, of sleep. Ani Shena, I am asleep. Because sleepfulness and unconsciousness represent the inability for the soul to grab hold of the light of the mind. I no longer have the sun of clarity revealing itself to me in the light of Torah Shebechsav, but I'm forced into tardema, into translation, into a secondary attempt to regain a sense of order. I'm no longer dealing with a clarified idea. I'm working my way back from a shards of a broken idea and trying to piece it back together in such a way that I can perhaps begin to see the outlines of the original. That is only born in confusion. That is only born in the nighttime of one's life, in the unconsciousness of one's life. The Gra also points out, the Ramchal points this out as well, that Mishnah comes from a language of Shinoi. That Mishnah, Torah Shebal Peh, all of the different Sidarim that represent the sum total of Torah Shebal Peh, represent the possibility of changes, of changing colors, of changing attitudes, of changing feelings, of sudden shifts in consciousness, sudden shifts in historical development. Torah Shebechsav is sturdy, it's stable throughout. It makes room for its surprises, it makes room for its traumas, but it's all contained within the singularity of Torah Shebechsav. Torah Shebal Peh already is a descent into changes. It's where the human being loses sight of the stability at the core of the soul. It loses sight of that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create the individual straight, Adam Yashar, but we were Mavakesh Cheshbonos Rabos, but we desired all sorts of complications. To be entangled and caught up in the complications of consciousness, of subjectivity. What it means to be a human, that's already to be caught up in changing colors. Like Rabbi Nachman tells us that we live in a world of Heichal HaGvanim HaMishtanim. We live in a world of shifting colors, where one moment it's up, one moment it's down. It's an Olam Hafuch Ra'isi. Above is below, below is above. It's the world of confusion. It's the world of Pirud. It's the world of Tamura, of interrelationships between things that appear separate, of unity between things that appear disparate, and separation between things that appear unified. It's a world of opinions. It's a world of lies. It's a world of false claims. That place of being human is the world of Torah Shebal Peh. It's the place of changes. It's associated, the Vilna Gaon tells us, with that lahat hacherav hamisapechas, that source of doubt that emerges into the world, specifically when the individual is cast out of Gan Eden. If I know where I belong, I know where I am, I have no need to run around trying to find truth from separate places. I can find what I need where I am. But once the individual has experienced that initial trauma of being cast out from their rightful place in Gan Eden, and being caught behind that lahat hacherev hamesapechas, that perpetual changing colors and the changing hues of doubt, of not knowing if I could go back in now or then or now or then, and being caught up in arrested development because I never know whether it's safe or not. That lahat hacherev hamesapechas, those shinuyim, those changes that take place in an individual's life, those insignificant shifts that appear to be so bewildering, that's the birthplace of the Mishnah, that's the birthplace of Mishnayos. Our tzaddikim tell us, the Arizal tells us, Rav Chaim Vital tells us, Rashbi tells us, that the 6 Siddharim of Mishnah, representative as the sum total of Torah Sheba'al Peh, is not by happenstance. 6 is a number that is deeply associated with this worldly experience. The 6 categories of right and wrong, kosher and puzzle, allowed and not allowed, the possibility of getting things wrong, the possibility of not being on the mark, those changes, that instability is deeply associated with Torah Sheba'al Peh to the extent that it is represented in the number of the Siddharim in Torah Sheba'al Peh. And not only that, but spatial orientation itself, up, down, right, left, front, back, the shapes of measurement, the shapes of something being one thing and not some other thing, are represented in the essence of Torah Sheba'al Peh, because Torah Sheba'al Peh is only born in concealment, and therefore it contains and it bears the mark of concealment itself. It all emerges from that Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, from that place of partaking from that tree of distortion, that tree of doubts in our lives, that gives birth to a Torah of doubt. It gives birth to that darkness, that slumber in one's life, that dreaming state where I no longer know what's right or what's wrong. The Ramak tells us that when a person learns Torah Sheba'al Peh, when a person learns Mishnah, they have to be careful, because what they're doing is they're engaging with separation. They're engaging with the separation that covers over and conceals the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what Mishnah is. In addition to the spatial orientation that we encounter when we deal with distortion and separation and measurement and specificity, we also find the birthplace of time awareness in Torah Sheba'al Peh. Torah Shebechsav starts with a claim, Bereshis bara Elokim, when it doesn't matter, Hashem created the world. Torah Sheba'al Peh, as we're going to see extensively, begins with a question of from when, Me'em Masai. It's a time question. It's a question of time orientation. And the Tikkunei Zohar tell us, and the Tosfos Yontif brings it down as well in his Akdama to the Perush of Mishnayos, and the Meiser Okeach brings it down as well, explaining what it means, that the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah of Zra'im, Moed, Nezikin, Nashim, Kodshim, and Taros is Roshei Tevos. It's an acronym of Zman Nakat, that time was taken into consideration. Because the world of Torah Sheba'al Peh is a world of time. It's a world of being late or early. It's a world of being too late to something that I needed or being too early for something that I need to be present for. It's a world of missed opportunities. It's a world of struggling to gain that precision that we so desperately desire, yet always being turned backwards when we recognize that, oh, I just missed it. That world of the lahat hacherev hamesapechas, that perception that says, oh, if I was there on time, I could have entered back into Gan Eden. But because I'm just a little bit too late, I can't make it through that rotating fiery sword. That world of boishesh Moshe lavo, that Moshe tarried, Moshe was delayed. It was the sense when Bnei Yisrael felt that Moshe was too late, that he was caught up in a question of time, he wasn't going to arrive properly, that we encounter the Chet HaEgel, which necessitates the creation of Torah Sheba'al Peh. And the Netziv, like we've spoken about numerous times, he says something incredible. What does it mean that Adam and Chava, in a prelapsarian state, lived without busha, they lived without shame? Says the Netziv that busha also means tarrying, a sense of being late. That lo yisbosheshu, that they were not embarrassed, they were not ashamed, it also means that they had no time awareness. They didn't feel that they were late or early to anything. They were exactly where they needed to be in that moment. That is the opposite of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Torah Sheba'al Peh, on a certain level, in the holiest sense, is a birthplace of neurosis, of difference of opinion, of struggle, of frustration, of pettiness at times, or apparent pettiness. and engagement with argumentation and allowing my own subjectivity to get involved in the svara, that place of imprecision. Chazal tell us in Medrash Tanchuma Parshas Noach that Paspa Melech Tochal, what does it mean to be a person who properly subserviates themselves, who gives themselves over, submits themselves, surrenders themselves to the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It means someone who's willing to suffer for the sake of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Because Torah Sheba'al Peh is a place of suffering. We suffer for the Torah, and it transforms itself into a Torah of suffering. That the Yagiyah of Torah Sheba'al Peh is the guf of Torah Sheba'al Peh. The struggle over understanding and clarifying Torah Sheba'al Peh is in and of itself the function of Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's the awareness that the soul has to struggle for truth in a world where truth has fallen apart and shattered. That place of shinoi, that place of difficulty, that place of time awareness. And then we encounter something profound. Because obviously, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not throwing us into a despondent place of separation. Obviously, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not throwing us into a place of concealment just because. But anytime we find ourselves in a place of concealment, anytime we find ourselves in a place of darkness, anytime we find ourselves in a place of fear, it's for the sake of revealing a deeper comfort that could not have been revealed without the fear. It's for the sake of revealing a deeper sense of peace that could not have been revealed except for the war. It's about revealing a deeper sense of truth that cannot be revealed except through the lie itself. It's for the sake of revealing an ascension that could not be revealed without the descent. It's for the sake of revealing an unbridled unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that could only be revealed through the limitation and the constriction of this worldly experience. So on the one hand, we know that the Mishnah is time awareness, space awareness, anxiety awareness, struggling for truth, zman nakat, being thrown into a world of shinuyim, of changes, being thrown into a world of darkness, of slumber. But at the very same point, it's axiomatic that the descent into the world of Torah Sheba'al Peh is not accidental, but rather it is absolutely necessary for the sake of revealing the light that will come about afterwards. And here's where we find profound statements from Chazal and Vayikra Rabbah that Geula itself is dependent on Liban HaMishnayos. That the study of Torah Sheba'al Peh is in and of itself the very thing that brings about redemption. Not because it's some merit of study that brings about redemption, but the study of Torah Sheba'al Peh itself is redemption. Because redemption is nothing other than returning back from darkness, back to that original space of light, and coming to realize that, wow, what I thought was darkness was ultimately an incubator for a deeper sense of light. And at that point, the Ramchal tells us, we'll say, Samchenu ki mois anisanu. You will gladden us like the days of our suffering. We will come to understand that the suffering was there only to give birth to a deeper joy. And the secret of the tzaddikim is that they tell us this while we're still in the suffering, so we can taste that light of the future in the present. That the secret of Torah Sheba'al Peh is descending into confusion for the sake of revealing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is found in the confusion as well. Mishna is osios neshama, the Arizal tells us. That when I learn a Mishnah, I'm ma'orer, a place within my neshama that cannot have been revealed if not for the descent into the Mishnah. I enter into that space, that territory of Olam HaYetzira, of all of the ever-changing colors of experience, for the sake of elevating it back up to the world of supernal unity, of bringing Niglos HaTorah back into that place of Nistaras HaTorah, of unity, of showing how unity and disunity are simply two expressions of the ultimate unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in this sense, yes, Mishnah is from the language of Shena, of slumber, but the Kilas Yaakov points out that Mishnah is also Rosh Tevos Me'oira Shinas Nishmas HaKadosha, that Mishnayos is awakening the soul from its slumber. That Talmud Bavli is what wakes us up, the study of V'hagisa B'yoimam V'layla, that I transform the night into a day, that I mahapech Layla into a yom. That's the koyach of Torah Sheba'al Peh, to take confusion, to take the language of translation and changes and time and space, and to descend and delve into the confusion and allow myself to be afraid and allow myself to be blocked out from the light of truth. And to truly ask the question of what in the world is this coming to talk about, and then forcing myself to a place of truth. What I've done is I have dragged the opposite of truth into truth. I have dragged the Hava Mina itself, that mistaken first assumption, into the Maskana. I have tasted that light of Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chayim, that these and those, both right and wrong, up and down, are all expressive of the unified light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Nachman tells us something incredible in the 79th teaching, the first volume of Likutei Moharan, that yes, Mishna represents the engagement with the 6 days of the week and confusion and concealment and distortion and all of the different synonyms that represent the natural anxiety of the spirit in its own most human conditionality. But at the very same point, don't think that the opposite of Mishnah is something other than Mishnah. The opposite of Mishnah is Mishnah in a redeemed way. That Shabbos itself is a time of Mishnah. Shabbos itself is a time of Torah Sheba'al Peh, but it's the Torah Sheba'al Peh when it's revealed to be reflective of the deepest light imaginable. That only by descending into the slumber and the confusion and the concealment of that Lahat Acherep Misapeches, do I have the capacity to ascend afterwards and realize that, oh my goodness, when I was asleep, I was also awake. When I was in darkness, I was also tasting light. When I was in that boring space of revealed Torah, I was also tasting the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When I was in that place of confusion, I was still in a place of clarity. And at that point, the person comes back armed with not only Torah Shebechsav, but Torah Sheba'al Peh as well. And we bring back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu this worldly experience, and we say, Hashem, we transformed your world of concealment into a world of Torah. The Balatanya teaches us, the Rebbe Rashab teaches us, all of the tzaddikim teach us that this world is a world of Torah Sheba'al Peh because our job is to transform this world into Torah itself. That Golus itself is simply representative of the struggle of clarifying the untruths that are inherent with the existence of time and space, which is Torah Sheba'al Peh. And our job is to be mevarer halacha aliba dehilchasa, to come in contact with the depth, with that singular point of truth that exists within all things. To recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we can't only find you in the light, but we can find you in darkness as well. Rav Tzadok HaKohen tells us that it's for this reason that Shas begins with Maseches Brachos. Because Maseches Brachos, Bracha Rosh Tzaddik, a blessing, the need for a blessing only emerges from the encounter of cursedness. That if everything is clarified, there's no need for a bracha. It's only when a person finds themselves in dire straits that they're in need for a bracha to be redeemed. It's only when we encounter a physical object which appears to be counterintuitive and separate from our spiritual consciousness that we need to make a bracha to be matir it to ourselves, to take that which has fallen and elevate it back into a state of fixedness. Brachos implies that I'm already stuck in the human conditionality of assuming things are fallen and irredeemable, and the bracha allows me to elevate it back up into a place of kedusha. As we know from the tzaddikim, from the Arizal and the Rashash, when I make a bracha, in Matbeya bracha, the kavanos of what it means to say Baruch Ata Hashem, I am quite literally drawing down the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu down into the vessels of separation. That's what brachos is about. And without those vessels of separation, there would be no chiddush of drawing down that infinite light. So Shas has to start with brachos to represent the fact that all of this concealment, all of these 6 sides of Mishnah and changes and concealment and slumber, it's all there to reveal the hamshacha of that Or Ein Sof in a deeper way. And then we go further of Tzadok and the tzaddikim of Ishbitz and Radzin and the Vilna Gaon. They ask the question, why is it Seder Zra'im that we start off with? Why is Maseches Brachos contained within the Seder Zra'im, the agricultural rules of what it means to be an individual who eats from the ground, of what it means to be a person and the laws of his kashrus to the Aretz? But let's see what we're looking at. Aretz represents the lowest level of experience. It's the most mundane of physical elements. It's the stuckness, that gravitational pull that we naturally feel that pulls us down to areas of despondency and hopelessness. But to transform that ground, that fallow ground, into a place of growth, exponential growth, the light of Eretz Yisrael, the light of Malchusa Kadisha, that lowest element of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's revelation, which will be revealed to be the highest level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's revelation. That world of Malchus, that world of femininity without eyes, of concealment, of groping around in the dark, that is the place of Azra'im, where growth will take place. Or Zarua L'Tzadik U'Liyishrelev Simcha, that the light is sown for the tzaddik. It's not apparent at first. Or Zarua L'Tzadik U'Liyishrelev Simcha Sofei Tevos Akiva. And we know that all of the halachos in the Mishnah, that they go according to Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva is the shirish of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Moshe Rabbeinu is the shirish of Torah Shebechsav, that clarity. Rabbi Akiva is the shirish of Torah Sheba'al Peh, that light of clarity that emerges specifically from within disunity. That Rabbi Akiva lived a difficult life until the age of 40, until he reached that letter Mem, which represents the opening of Torah Sheba'al Peh of Me'em Masai. That Rabbi Akiva was nichnas b'shalom v'yatzav b'shalom. And we know that Shas Mishnayos ends with Maseches Uksin talking about that ein matzah kli ro'i lebracha ela hashalom, that shalom is the essence of all things. Shalom is making peace from amongst distortion, a distorted vision of myself, that tornness of the soul that Rabbi Akiva experiences. It's only redeemed when we understand the light of Or Zarua L'Tzadik U'Yishrei Lev Simcha, that secret of Kriyat Shema, of Mosar Nefesh Al Echad, that Rabbi Akiva understands the need to give his life over for the sake of Echad, of unifying that which appears disparate. That place of Shema Yisrael, which is exactly what we start Seder Zra'im off with, of Me'em Masai Korin Shema Ba'arvis. The entire question of Torah Sheba'al Peh is, how do I find the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, in the world of Me'em Masai, in the world of fear, in the world of time, in the world of separation, in that world of Rabbi Akiva? How do I proclaim my faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu? As we're going to see as we descend into the particularities of the Mishnah. Seder Zra'im, we're told, is referred to as Emunah. Emunah zu Seder Zra'im. Why? Because that was our Chazal tell us, and our tzaddikim of Ishbitz and Radzin tell us in the Parshios of Lech Lecha and Vayera, that to be mazriya in the ground, to plant something in the ground, is to engage in an act of absolute destruction. I plant the seed from my own funds and I allow it to be swallowed up by the earth. I give it over, I let it die, and I lose hope in it. But it's specifically at that moment that Emunah emerges. Without that darkness, there's no need for emunah. It's only in face of that darkness that emunah grows, and a person plants with trust in the chaya ha'olamim, and that or ki tov, those tes prakim of Maseches Brachos, tes representing the goodness that is hidden within itself, like the Zohar HaKadosh tells us. That to learn Mishnayos, to enter into the world of Torah Sheba'al Peh, is to engage with the deepest confrontation of what it means to be a human being in this world. Rav Tzadok says that the reason Shas starts off with the question of nighttime is because Shas is nighttime. Shas is representation of nighttime in the human mind. It's that place of clarifying truth from within untruth, of clarifying faith from within concealment. And what we're going to see Be'ezras Hashem is how the Mishnah, how all of Shas can offer us passages, pathways towards encountering HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the quieter areas of our lives. Because when we learn Mishnah, we awaken our neshama, we awaken our soul, we allow ourselves to become part of the Mishnah. Rav Chaim Vital, in Shari Kedusha, in Chelek Daled in Shari Kedusha, the meditative manuscript that was concealed for so long, expresses very clearly that if a person wants to contemplate HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a state of calmness, if a person wants to encounter that menucha ki tov, that calmness of the spirit, sit in a dark room, close your eyes, breathe in, hold it, exhale, allow oneself to get comfortable in their chair, wherever they might be, forget the outside world, forget the confusion of the outside world, forget the terror of the outside world. And when a person has finally found that inner space in the mind, that Beis HaMikdash of the mind, choose a Mishnah. And when you begin repeating that Mishnah over and over and over again, slowly but surely, quietly but sturdily, a person begins to become part of Torah Sheba'al Peh. A person begins to feel as if they are part of Shisha Sidra Mishnah. That the Siddharim of Mishnah, we're masader ourselves. We take ourselves from disorder, from bilti seder, and we transform ourselves into a state of seder, into a state of cohesiveness and connectivity. We know famously that the shirish of the minhag of Tikkun Leil Shavuos comes from the Chavraya Kadisha in the town of Svas, of Moshe Alshich and the Beis Yosef and the Magen Meisharim. And as it's recorded in the Shlach HaKadosh, the Beis Yosef and his chavraya were reading from the Zohar Kadosh and reading Mishnayos, Baal Peh, over and over. And then at a certain point, one of the chavraya, one of the tzaddikim, began to be overcome, and they began to lose themselves, and a bas kol began to emerge from within them. And the lashon that bas kol says is Ani ha-Mishna midaberes misach grono. I am the Mishnah speaking from within your throat. And our tzaddikim tell us that that's not only for the tzaddikim. Each and every one of us can reach that level of Ani ha-Mishna midaberes misach grono. I am that light of the Mishnah speaking from within you. Your awareness in a state of concealment, in a state of changes, in a state of slumber, your awareness in a world of concealment and difficulty, your ability to transform that space into Torah is what transforms you into the Mishnah itself. And in that way, we become, like our tzaddikim tell us, part and parcel of the undying, unending, unfolding process of the infinite Torah that is Torah Sheba'al Peh, until it comes back to Torah Shebechsav, uniting the two of them together. And so Be'ezras Hashem, what we're going to try and encounter in these shirim is to confront the shena, that slumber, that deep confusion associated with Mishnah, and to awaken ourselves, to learn how not to fall asleep, but rather, how do I proclaim Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad specifically at nighttime? How do I find the light of a Kadosh Baruch Hu at night? Be'ezras Hashem, what we'll focus on next week is going to be the first word and the first concept of the Mishnah of Me'em Masai Korin et Shema Ba'arvis. Be'ezras Hashem.